62% of all Americans are behind on their mortgage. Homeless rates are rising 18% year over year, and all of our production runs on this made-to-break policy. There's something seriously wrong here. After World War II ended in 1945, America was booming. Factories that built tanks now churned out cars, toasters, and TVs. But there was a problem. With so much stuff, how do you keep people buying? How do you keep the consumers consuming? Enter planned obsolescence. This is designing products to wear out intentionally, break, or feel outdated faster so you'll have to buy again. Before the war, things were built to last, but in the 1920s, CEO of General Motors Alfred Sloan had a bold idea. Make cars look outdated every year with new styles, like flashy new tail fins. By the 1950s, this style obsolescence was everywhere. Cars, appliances, even clothes. Why keep a perfectly good car when the new one is cooler? Now, this didn't just apply to aesthetics. Some of these products adopted this new policy or philosophy and actually started designing their products to have a set fail point. By 1924, most Americans who could afford a new car already owned one, often a durable Ford Model T built to last decades. In 1925, the Phoebus cartel, comprised of Osram, Philips, and General Electric, secretly capped light bulb lifespans at 1,000 hours, down from the expected 2,500 just to boost sales. Internal documents, later uncovered, confirmed that this was deliberate, making an early case of functional obsolescence. The 1930s Great Depression only amplified these ideas. In 1932, Bernard London's Ending the Depression Through Planned Obsolescence proposed government-mandated expiration dates on goods to spur buying and jobs. Though unadopted, it did influence thought. Consumer Engineering in 1932 by Roy Sheldon and Egmont Ahrens framed creative waste as progress. Sears Roebuck began annual refrigerator redesigns embedding this idea of stylistic obsolescence.
By the way, would we have believed that this could happen? Packed with food. 11 cubic feet in her refrigerator and 11 cubic feet in her freezer. 22 cubic feet in all. Yes, she does appreciate her new RCA Whirlpool Mark refrigerator and freezer, the world's newest advancement in refrigeration. Not an evolution, but a revolution in function and beauty.
World War II, running from 1939 to 1945, somewhat paused these trends. Factories, under specific directives, started to pump out durable military goods, not consumer products. See, rationing actually curbed spending, which made sense, but during this time, there was almost a doubling of the median average income for US families, which created this pent-up demand where the supply was not there. The supply was all going to the war effort, and these consumer goods were sort of put on the back burner. The Phoebus cartel, which was formed pre-war, actually dissolved under this, with the wartime pressure not bringing in enough profits on that consumer end. But the idea, that core idea of the 1,000-hour lifespan for a light bulb took off. As the war ended, manufacturers faced oversupply, and they were met with a public that was eager to resume spending on these consumer products. But with this oversupply, you see, these manufacturing plants had an abundance of resources and materials that were intended for the war machine to make these durable military goods. But when there's no war, these materials can go towards consumer products, and they had an overabundance of metal and steel and other fabrication materials that they could just repurpose into components for things like ovens, fridges, TVs, and toasters. This perfect mix, if you will, of a public that was eager to resume spending on these basic generic consumer products and a manufacturing plant that had an overabundance of supply led directly to this concept of planned obsolescence. This system of constantly feeding the consumer's need to consume, but constantly feeding the profits on the back end of these manufacturing conglomerates. At the time, it was seen as a complete win-win situation for both the manufacturer and the consumer, but in the background, the consumer was never really privy to the information that the manufacturers were creating their products to have this fail point, this set breaking point that went far beyond the stylistic obsolescence of just adding a new aesthetic feature to a car.
It's good at toy stores. appliance stores, jewelry stores, sporting goods, music stores. It's MasterCharge, good in more places for more gifts than any other card.
You see, this post-war boom was a perfect storm for planned obsolescence. Suburbia grew, and credit cards debuted in 1958, and advertising followed it. It surged. In 1954, designer Brooks Stevens defined planned obsolescence as, quote, instilling in the buyer the desire to own something just a little newer, a little sooner than necessary. And this became a cultural force. General Motors actually led the charge. Annual car model unveilings with new tail fins and chrome turned vehicles into status symbols. Appliances followed. Frigidaire and GE rolled out yearly refrigerator models with new features, often using cheaper materials to fail post-warranty. DuPont's nylon stockings, nearly indestructible in 1939, were reformulated to tear easily, driving the need for monthly replacements. Planned obsolescence operates through four main mechanisms. Functional obsolescence uses weak materials or timers to ensure a set fail point. Stylistic obsolescence makes these older products feel unfashionable or no longer trendy. Technological obsolescence renders devices incompatible with new software updates. And systemic obsolescence, well, that blocks the ability to repair these gadgets and devices via proprietary parts that are made unavailable. Post-war TVs lasted 20 years on average, but by the 1980s, cheaper components cut the lifespan to 5 to 7 years. Printers like HP's DeskJet used chips to disable cartridges at 90% capacity per a 1990s Consumer Reports study. In fashion, polyester blends replaced durable wool, which would wear out much faster. Apparel sales grew 400% from 1970 to 1990 per the Bureau of Economic Analysis. The tech boom only amplified this obsolescence. Early PCs were upgradable, but Apple's 1980s sealed Macintosh designs limited repairs. Windows updates would slow these older machines, nudging upgrades. A 1998 Intel memo admitted that designing chips with lifecycle limits to sustain sales was a strategy. By the 1990s, electronic waste, or this e-waste, reached 20 million tons annually per UN estimates, with lead and mercury leaching into groundwater. Now, this culture of planned obsolescence inside manufacturing and production is still very alive and well and thriving today. Just think about the iPhone trouble, where if you didn't get a new iPhone, your iPhone was going to be slower, the battery was going to not last as long. All of these things are still happening in this very moment, and while it's not the leading cause of poverty in our country, it's just one of the pieces in this puzzle that answers why are we all so broke now? You see, here's the thing. The manufacturing and the consumption of products relies on one thing, and that is the consumer's spending power. What's the purchasing power that I, as an American, have? The average median income of an adult in America is $62,000. But that $62,000 isn't theirs. That average American making $62,000 a year will face $4,743 in FICA tax. This is Social Security and Medicare. Another $5,579 in federal income tax, assuming they take the $15,000 standard deduction, and $2,790 in state income tax, for a total withholding of $13,112. So now we have $48,888 left. But we have to address some essentials. The median rent in America is $1,600 per month, with rural areas in Oklahoma or West Virginia at an average of $1,200, and these urban metros like New York or San Francisco reaching an upwards of $3,000 a month on average. Taking the median of $1,600 per month, after housing, we're left with a grand total of $29,688. The USDA provides 4 tiers for grocery expenses for the average single American. A thrifty budget containing your basic staples and bulk buys with minimal convenience foods is going to run $260 to $300 a month. A low-cost, balanced meals with some variety brings you to $300 to $350, while a moderate, which is considered standard for most Americans, including proteins, veggies, and occasional treats, will run $385 to $445 a month, with a liberal budget, including premium brands and more organic specialty items, will run $450 to $550 a month. So let's say we eat somewhere in the middle, a moderate budget at $400 a month, we now have $24,888 remaining. But after an average of $350 for monthly utilities and $80 monthly just to put gas in your vehicle, we've decreased to $19,728 in purchasing power. Oh, and that basic car payment itself, which averages at $580 per month, brings us to a grand total of $12,768 remaining. Now, don't go thinking all of that bounty is yours yet, because in America, you'll pay an average of 7.5% sales tax on absolutely anything you buy. So in reality, your $12,768 remaining holds around $11,810 in purchasing power. Meaning, if you're an average American working 40 hours a week or 160 hours a month after the bare essentials just to survive, you're gonna have a little over 11 grand. This, of course, doesn't even account for an average monthly cell phone bill or internet. God forbid you have a dog or a cat or a kid. But now that we have our end result of $11,000, we can enter this loop of planned obsolescence, where no matter what we buy or how well we care for it, it is set to fail. It's gonna break at some point in time or get an update that just makes it obsolete. Alright, so I just paid about $4.40 for this coffee right here, and you may say, yeah, as time goes on, prices increase, but this is a direct result of something known as inflation. And something you might not know about inflation is that since 1990, it's increased at a cumulative 147%. That means a dollar back in 1990 is worth about 40.5 cents in today's economy. On the other hand, the minimum wage has only increased around 90%, leaving a disparity of around 57%. And while yes, our wages have increased, I mean the minimum wage hasn't increased since 2009, which is insane if you ask me, inflation has risen at such a rate it's made those wage increases practically irrelevant. Not even practically, it has. 57% difference. Inflation is the rate at which the price of goods and services increase, like groceries, rent, or gas. It's measured by the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which tracks a typical basket of stuff that Americans buy. When inflation rises, each dollar buys less. Think of it like your money slowly losing its superpower. Since 1990, inflation has averaged about 2.5% each year, but it's had some wild swings. We start in 1990, the Berlin Wall had just fallen and the US economy was navigating a post-Cold War. Inflation was a bit spicy at 5.4%, driven by oil price spikes from the Gulf War. A gallon of gas cost about $1.15 and a movie ticket was around $4.20. But as the decade rolled on, things calmed down. The Federal Reserve, led by Alan Greenspan, kept a tight leash on inflation, targeting around 2%. By 1998, inflation had hit a low of 1.6%, one of the lowest since the 1960s. Why? Well, globalization brought cheaper imports, and the tech boom made goods like computers more affordable. The money supply, or M2, cash savings and other liquid assets, grew steadily at about 4 to 6% a year, from $3.2 trillion in 1990 to $4.9 trillion by 2000. This kept prices stable, and a dollar in 1990 was still worth about 85 cents by 2000. The 2000s, though, were a roller coaster. Inflation averaged 2.6%, but had some big swings. In 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, and 9/11 slowed the economy, keeping inflation right around 2.8%. But by 2005, things heated up, literally. Energy prices surged, pushing inflation to 3.4%. A gallon of gas jumped to an average of $2.30. Then came 2008, the financial crisis. Oil hit $147 a barrel, driving inflation to 3.8%. But when the housing bubble burst, the economy tanked, and 2009 actually saw a deflationary period where prices dropped by 0.4%, an extremely rare event. The Fed responded by printing money like never before through quantitative easing, or QE. They bought bonds to pump cash into banks, growing M2 from $8.2 trillion in 2008 to $8.8 trillion by 2010. This actually stabilized markets, but planted seeds for future price pressures. By 2010, that dollar from 1990 was now worth about 60 cents. The 2010s were actually the calm before the storm. You see, inflation stayed low, averaging 1.8%. The Fed kept interest rates near zero, encouraging growth after the Great Recession. Cheap oil, global trade, and tech innovations like smartphones and e-commerce kept general prices down. In 2015, inflation hit a near-record low of 0.1%, and gas actually dropped. The money supply grew steadily from $8.8 trillion in 2010 all the way to $15.4 trillion by 2019. But it didn't spark inflation because money wasn't circulating fast. Economists call this low velocity. By 2019, inflation was a tame 1.8%. Life actually felt affordable, but trouble was brewing. A dollar from 1990 was now worth about 50 cents, but the stage was set for a big shakeup. Then came 2020. The pandemic absolutely shut down the world. Businesses closed, supply chains broke, and demand for goods like toilet paper and laptops absolutely skyrocketed. Inflation initially dipped to 1.2% as people stopped spending. But governments and the Fed acted fast. Under President Trump, the CARES Act pumped $2.2 trillion into the economy in 2020. When President Biden took office in 2021, he signed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. Together, these stimulus packages, plus a few other minors, totaled over $5 trillion. The Fed went all in, buying $3 trillion in assets, pushing its balance sheet from $7.4 trillion to $8.9 trillion by 2022. The M2 money supply exploded, jumping 40% from the $15.4 trillion in 2019 all the way to $21.7 trillion in 2022, the fastest growth the country had ever seen. But all that additional printing of money, all of that cash had to go somewhere. With factories slowed and ports clogged, there weren't enough goods to meet the demand. Prices began to soar. In 2021, inflation hit 4.7% and then peaked at 9.1% in June of 2022, the highest since 1981. Gas hit $5 a gallon, eggs doubled and then tripled in price, and rent skyrocketed. A dollar in 2020 lost about 15 cents of value by 2023. Economists estimate that 10 to 15% of that inflation spike came from the raw money printing of the Biden era, with the rest from supply shocks and pent-up demand. Low-income households felt it the worst, spending up to 14% of their income on basics like food and fuel. So what's the damage of all of that? Since 1990, prices have risen an average of 147%. A dollar in 1990 does just buy 40.5 cents worth of goods today, based on the CPI jumping from 130.7 all the way to 320.5. The math is simple. Divide the 1990 CPI by today's, and you'll see that the dollar's purchasing power has been cut by more than half. But remember, it's not just the money printing. Supply chain issues, energy prices, and consumer demand all played their part. Think of it like a perfect storm. Too much money chasing too few goods. So why is everyone so broke today? Well, between inflation, taxation, and obsolescence, it becomes pretty clear. The money we make is dwindled down to a minuscule amount of actual purchasing power, and that purchasing power, that money just isn't worth what it used to be. And when we do actually get to use that little bit of money we have left, it's spent on products that are just made to break. And if you're somehow lucky enough, or for some of us smart enough, to break out of that matrix, that leaves the door open to a whole new range of issues. Let's say you take the entrepreneurial route and try starting your own business. Well, that just opens you up to further taxation that the average civilian is not going to face, not to mention all the new licensing fees and other hurdles you have to jump through. But the struggle of the small American business or the entrepreneur is a story for next time. If you found this video informative or possibly entertaining, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, as we'll see you on that next story.